Professor Markku Kivinen, director of the Aleksanteri Institute, has a long perspective to Russian studies. He took the challenge in 1996 as the director of the new institute, at the same year as Russia re-elected Boris Yeltsin to the second term. After that, many things have changed, but he is still here. After Yeltsin's resignation, Russia has had 2 different presidents, and she has passed multiple turns, ups and downs. In contrary to that development of our big neighbor, Kivinen has navigated the Institute successfully through tumultuous research environment representing continuity of Russian studies and developing the Finnish school or Russian studies consistent way. Please, Kivinen, the word is yours.
So, Madam President, Chancellor, dear colleagues and friends, my intention was to speak from the paper, but because the panel took so much of the time, I have to concentrate on my thoughts. I have to concentrate my message. I have one basic message which concerns the forthcoming 20 years of the Aleksanteri Institute, and that message is that we will move our perspective, broaden our perspective in such a way that we are moving Russia from the explained variable to the explaining variable. And it means that we are still, of course, studying Russia's domestic development and all the other problems which we have been studying in our former Center of Excellence or the existing, still going on, Center of Excellence. But we are also aiming at broadening the perspective to global challenges. They have been echoed here in this room during this day in many ways, speaking about new security threats, environmental change. Many global challenges are with us on a global scale, and we are now concentrating on making something out of the Russia's role in terms of global challenges. And this is based on the worry that we feel about the contemporary world situation, in that sense that the tension between the great powers is now threatening to make the common solutions to these global challenges even more problematic than it used to be. And I'll say only a few things about this, these global challenges that we try to cover and what the perspective in those terms seem to be. First of all, if we think of climate change and even more generally the environmental problems, they cannot be solved without solving the energy issues in the world. And these things cannot be solved without such countries as Russia and China. Now, what is commonly known is that Russia is depending on hydrocarbons, on its incomes, half of the taxes, 2/3 of the exports connected to hydrocarbons. What is not usually known is that Russia is also rich in renewables. And the other aspect which is not known is how significant a role the natural gas can play in forthcoming decades concerning the transformation towards renewables. And if we look at this problem from a global scale, we can see that, first of all, that Russia has the resources. China has a huge demand. The United States and the West has the technology. But if we look more closely at this situation in concrete terms, now the problem is that lacking this perspective of cooperation. Even if they write the Kyoto Protocol, they don't have resources to develop their own energy sector. The energy efficiency is not making progress without new technologies, without more constructive relationship to the West, and also using the financing instruments which are sanctioned by the West at the moment. This influences all the environmental problems also. This is kind of a shooting our own foot also, that the sanctions also make impossible some of the crucial environmental investments. There is a positive possibility based on Russian resources and Russian attitudes also concerning this kind of a positive energy superpower role which Russia could play based on these resources that it has. But there is also the negative side, that if this does not work out, if the renewables are not coming, if the energy efficiency is not coming, if there is more and more securitization of the energy sector and cooperation with the West, the global facing of these global challenges is really jeopardized. We have established a cooperation with Markku Kulmala's Center of Excellence concerning climate change, and I think this is a very significant opening for us in those terms that we really have to face these issues on a multidisciplinary basis. Our contribution to that will be, on the other hand, to follow the effects of climate change in social terms, and on the other hand, to concentrate on energy policy in Russia. And this definitely is one of the examples of these global challenges which are really significant, and without Russia we cannot solve on a global scale. Another example is this, what Aleksanteri Institute was talking about, these new security threats, drug trafficking, human trafficking, economic crime, and so forth. And they don't ask about the borders. They go across the borders. They seem to require international cooperation. But they are confronted by this kind of sphere of influence game which is going on in the world at the moment. In some cases we have positive examples, like the northern logistical route to Afghanistan, which Russia allowed the United States to construct via Kyrgyzstan to Afghanistan because of the huge problem of trucks within Russia. 2 million young Russians are going to trucks every year. And these are not only Russian problems. These drug routes which Aleksanteri Institute was showing, they also concern Europe, Western Europe, and also, of course, Central Asia, Middle East, and so forth. And they have to be studied, and they have to be also faced in policy terms, in common policies. This also concerns human trafficking, economic crime, and other such kinds of issues. But there is a confrontation between this sphere of influence game, tension on the other hand, and then these kind of common problems on the other hand. Of course, this problem of how modern is Russian economy, how modern it is there efforts to modernize Russian economy? Of course, there has been efforts all the time. There is Skolkovo, there is efforts to make Russian car industry competitive and these kinds of things. And some limited successes as well. But the global problem which we are facing in general terms is digitalization. It has a very positive side. When people were talking about the positive elements, they were talking exactly about internet and digitalization and these kinds of things. They are positive things, but they are also a huge challenge for the global economy and also for the national economies. In those terms, we have faced this in Finland. We have seen how the paper pulp industry has completely changed its production paradigms. And also the media, which is completely in crisis based on this digitalization. And the great prediction by many leading leading sociologists at the moment is that this will completely destroy the prospects of middle class positions in the society, because digitalization is not touching only the traditional industrial work, which has been diminishing in developed countries for a long time. But it will more and more cover the problems also concerning with middle class jobs. And in Russia, where the middle class has only been growing recently or becoming more real in recent 10, 15 years, this problem is also huge. What does it mean? Is this something that they are able to deal with? So this technological development is a global challenge, but it also requires cooperation across the borders. Russia definitely needs, in terms of its diversification of the economy, it needs Western technologies. They still have rather good basis in their educational system. If you look at the Human Development Index, for example, Russia is still doing well in terms of educational system. But we hear from our scholars studying this sphere, we have very worrying stories about the corruption within the system and how it can be deteriorated and so forth. The international cooperation is needed for that. It's needed for making the Russian technological development to face these huge challenges. Then Russia has a huge welfare problem. In the world of inequality, we are also facing a new phase of inequality in the world. What we have been witnessing is, as President Halonen said, we have been witnessing economic processes which have raised hundreds of millions of people from poverty towards decent living conditions in countries like China, Russia, Brazil, and now even India and so forth. But the other side of the coin is the growing inequality. The fact that 62 persons own as much money as 3 billion poorest people in the world is a huge, it shows something about this inequality. And the difference between the growing economies in Russia and China during the last decades and the West after the Second World War is that the inequality has been growing. In Europe, the inequality remained after the Second World War when the industrialization and deindustrialization happened in the Western countries. The inequality was not growing. So they are facing exceptional problems in terms of inequality, but also about the human development in general terms. They have a positive prospect. They have still resources, economic resources. But when we have analyzed their social policies, they started to talk about social policy intensively 2005 and 2006. But when we analyze the budgetary development, we find very little evidence that this would be put into effect, at least for the first 5 years. The first turning point was 2009 when they started to use the pensions as an economic cycle stabilizing element after 2008 crisis. And the second effort was to concentrate on birth rate and family policies. These are one of the light points in Russian social policy, but otherwise they have not been able to address the huge problem of mortality, which is completely exceptional not only in comparison with developed countries, but also in comparison with countries like Brazil, China, but even India. And Russia is lacking behind in terms of life expectancy, for example, in comparison with India. And this is a huge challenge for them. It's of course a domestic challenge, but these kinds of deteriorating structures of the welfare in industrial societies is something which is not unique in Russia. Of course, there is no global social policy solutions they are based on domestic developments to a large extent. But an understanding of these problems is definitely something which is needed. And also concerning these global inequality things, we seem to need global solutions as well. Then, of course, in terms of identity, there was this discussion about Russian development in terms of its identity or turning more hostile towards the West. That is really the case, that there are state programs concerning the creating national identity now, which seem to be really being basically anti-European. For example, in St. Petersburg, they have the teaching of Finnish language has been replaced by Central Asian languages and China. And there is an idea of Eurasian Union also as an ideological element, and Eurasianism, which is a very strange idea, is becoming more significant in Russian public discourse. But not only in public discourse for the own people, but also in other countries. For example, I was last week, in fact, in Iran, where they were approached by the Russians in order to argue that the Shiite Muslims and Orthodox Christians are kind of a natural ideological combination, representing the truth Christianity on the other hand and the truth Islam on the other hand. They didn't get much reply from the Iranian side. They were realistic enough to understand that this is power politics. But these issues are really used in political terms more than we would have ever expected 20 years ago, when we expected that there would be some kind of a slowing down of ideological confrontations and so forth. So this kind of a creation of nationalism, nationalistic spirit, of course it is nationalism using political use of religion and so forth. They are not unique in Russia. They are also a global challenge. A global challenge in those terms that we, in all modern societies, we face this confrontation of science on the other hand and religion on the other hand, rational politics, power politics, and then still desecularization, religion coming more significant in political terms. And this is, of course, a huge intellectual challenge for all of us. First of all, of course, we have to understand, but we don't have to accept the idea, for example, that Russia is completely ideologically different because it's an Orthodox country or whatsoever. So these global challenges are here to stay. They are big issues. We are moving our effort to study Russia more in those terms, that we try to analyze how Russia influences this. And of course, our intention is to find some kind of positive scenarios concerning this crisis. But if we are not able to do that, I think that this is something which cannot be forgotten because of the international tensions and because of this kind of a return of the Cold War rhetorics. Because if we were to wait 20 years before we are able to solve these problems, I think we would end up in a situation in the spirit of Samuel Beckett's Endgame, where a blind man asks the other all the time, "What is happening? What is happening?" And the other replies, "Something is taking its course." We have to make a difference. Thank you. I thank all of you who have been coming here today, and I wish that we will make this common intellectual effort a real thing for the next 20 years as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kivinen. I want also to thank the whole audience, our President, Chancellor, and all of you to participating and giving your contribution to this anniversary seminar. Our panel discussion was really interesting, and I believe that the whole institute and my colleagues, we got energy from this event, and we understand and how much also science and the university community is needed University community, academic community is hundreds of years old. Governments comes and goes every 4 years. So we will continue this. Thank you